Okay, not the smoothest transition, but I'm working on it. Welcome to session 4 of the Scintillating Science of Logic. If you want to see the previous sessions, they're for free on YouTube or wherever else they're uploaded by this point. The only payment I ask is that you help change the world for the positive and to remain hopeful as what we call the mega crisis, which is this meta crisis and poly crisis. As these things unfold in the next few months to next 2 years, I suppose, is what the experts are saying, that you remain hopeful and helpful and spreading the message of these powerful words as best as that you can. I'm going to say something a little bit shocking here about what we're doing. In the previous sessions, we introduced Hegel as a very powerful philosopher, and that there's a new way of teaching him that can finally unite the Hegelians and bring together some kind of change to how we make meaning with logic. And of course, Hegel's magnum opus is the science of logic. But I want to say something shocking that I realized occurs when you read somebody like Hegel long enough. And that's that what he's teaching is extremely powerful and can change the entire world because it is the word of truth. In fact, it is the proof of truth itself with a capital T. So our religious individuals in the audience will be loving this as a sort of a vindication that it looks like Hegel's a right Hegelian and he's religious and all of this kind of rhetoric. And our left Hegelians, our atheists or secularists might be thinking to themselves, this is okay, we've seen this before, this is just normal left, right Hegelianship, traditional, Christian, Lutheran, Hegel claimed to be Lutheran. There's nothing new here, but there is something new here. We are not just operating in the mode of faith in terms of absolute knowing. We're operating in a proof, a logic. Logic is necessity. And if you're not a polished philosopher or an academic, I'm going to try and break down this very difficult philosopher in a way where we can all understand what his message is because it's universal. It applies to everyone everywhere. And at first it looks very difficult what he's writing. In fact, it's so difficult, it's incomprehensible. But it's only incomprehensible to what we consider ordinary consciousness. And ordinary consciousness is what is creating this meta crisis, this poly crisis, this mega crisis. And I feel like we can solve that for the first time in a way that all of us can grasp, because once you break through out of ordinary consciousness, like I did, and you do your homework, your wisdom homework, then you break into what's called speculative consciousness, like we talked about in prior sessions. And what he's writing is actually the most simple, profound thing you'll ever read. It's much easier to read how Hegel writes than how we ordinarily use language, because it's so fragmented and broken in many ways. And what we think about, we bring about. Where attention goes, energy flows, and we build structures on this faulty foundation of sense-making, this logic of what was called contingency. Contingency just is a fancy word for aligning with truth and absolute objectivity, what's really there in reality, and not aligning with that. That it can have an element of caprice or a sort of kind of randomness to it that's based on our will or our relativity to our understanding of the universe, which could be flawed, right? So we're approximating this new profound knowledge through current philosophy, current academics, current culture, current common sense, which is currently not good enough to break through into this more flowing and brilliant and blessed or beautiful in terms of art ways of communicating and sense making. So what we're proposing here is that you're going to learn to become divine. In other words, in secular terms, you're going to become an infinite scientist that can prove every assertion that you make, whether divine, ordinarily contingent, universal, empirical, experimental, whatever you want to call it. All these modes of learning are these metamodes. There's 5 of them: art, religion, abstract science, or abstract philosophy, abstract science, and then genuine wisdom. And we're trying to bring you to genuine wisdom, not just ordinary wisdom or abstract or capricious wisdom, which is bound to time. These are eternal, timeless truths, which is really what philosophy and wisdom was supposed to be about in the first place. These are truths so profound that they cross all time, spaces, ages, epochs, all cultures, all languages, all traditions, all truths. And this is what, in an incredible sense, can be learned as a structure in a simplified way. Because wisdom is a simpler kind of knowledge that's more efficacious, more profound. It does more with less. You actually have to forget a lot of what you've learned in abstract or this brutal, traumatizing culture. You have to forget some of these things to get back to the essence of what is true, or real science, real objectivity. So in a way, to get to this divine, absolute knowing, this self-certainty that you are also the truth, requires logic, requires proof. You can actually justify every axiom, every claim that you need to follow this absolute ideal version of yourself, the highest version of yourself, because Hegel provides a scaffolding, a structure that is organic, it's living. For our artists that want beauty, it's alive, it's not just this dead, rigid, he calls it the dead bones of spirit logic. You know, we've killed it in some way. So what we're doing here is actually the sublation, the combining of opposites in a logic. And we're going to teach this in the art mode, religious mode, abstract philosophy, abstract science, and then genuine wisdom, where you can do it all. You can make your cake and eat it too. And hopefully it's a vegan cake as much as possible with fair trade certified chocolate chips, because philosophy is not just supposed to be theoretical, it's supposed to be practical too. It's about justice, fair trade certified trade in the world, real trade, economics, politics. It's all supposed to be wise. It's supposed to be spiritual. It's just not supposed to be superstitious. Okay, so Hegel embraces mysticism, but it's a rational kind of mysticism. But it's not a dead kind of rationalization, which is currently in abstract science. It's a living, eternal kind of rationalization that we call genuine reason. It's simultaneously intuitive and objective and natural and spontaneous, like art and religion like it to be, and rapture, but it's also disciplined, it's structured, it's clear, it has distinctions, it's determinate, in other words. So you get everything if you know how to work in the right wayfulness of things. And wayfulness in the things around you is a logic. Okay, so you can start to see those metamodes coming together in a beautiful flowing. We're not just saying, oh, everybody belongs together, love, 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 right? Which is what some of the interfaith attempts are worldwide, but that's not strong enough. That's not a strong enough cohesiveness to create a super coherence of oneness in essence, with all the diversity being preserved at the same time. So we're not talking about totalitarianism in this horrible way where everybody has to be the same sensuousness, which means taste, touch, sound, everybody needs to have the same clothing, all that. There's a diversity that's preserved in the essence, the oneness. And that oneness happens in the sixth sense, thoughts. So that's a bit of a brief explanation to upgrade what is really being taught to you here. It is incredibly profound. It has transformed my life. I feel like there is hope that we can get out of the situation that we're in. We have 6 existential crises facing us all at the same time, accelerating, compounding, not in a conspiratorial way only, but in a way that real scientists, people who are studied as much as you believe in science, it's hard to know what the truth is because media is also being changed so radically. And the media organizations are trying to keep up and doing their best. So we work in the spirit of sublation, not just negation and reducing things. We're incorporating them in a new way. And I want you to learn that and to become a part of the solution. If you can determine it for yourself, you have to know it. It can't be dogmatic or in some way cultish in the negative sense of cults. It needs to be something that preserves your ability to be self-determining, a genuinely rational, wise agent with agency in this new world government, this new world inner government that we're calling New World Spirit. Okay. I hope you're able to understand and appreciate a little more of what we're giving off for free here, or giving up for free. And hopefully we have some academics and scholars in here that can help verify the true profundity of what is occurring in these words that I'm using, thanks to Hegel and the 113 philosophers of history that he took from all these traditions. He took from them all in many ways. Okay, so let's get into this new way of teaching. We call this the Metamode way of teaching, the scintillating science of logic, because it is quite scintillating and beautiful when you know how to teach it and see it in the right way. As we talked about in prior sessions, there's a lot of disagreement in how Hegel is interpreted, which is why not even the Hegelians are releasing this higher kind of community spirit. Or if you're secular, you can think of sports teams, right? You have a spirit of performing together. And we're aiming for something called flow state. And I'm going to teach this in 3 levels, you could say. And they're all going to become free because we need to move quickly. Spirit moves at the speed of trust and love, which we define those words logically for the first time. We can ground them upon an absolute, what's called the presuppositionless principle. And it's incredible. So we're going to read the Science of Logic again here. And if you followed prior sessions, I hope you don't mind the introduction being a little bit lengthy. But you can see here the Metamodes are on the side. And you can see that the first paragraphs were talking about how there's been a transformation in Germany around Hegel's time. And that the last 25 years involved this guy named Kant and all these great philosophers that were missing something. And Hegel is talking a lot about what's missing seems to be this metaphysics, and it's very bizarre because the way that he looks at metaphysics is not how ordinary scientists look at metaphysics of his age, because the French Revolution was changing things in terms of getting rid of the church and state, getting rid of that superstition and relying on human reason, which seems to go somewhere. It's not so superstitious. And you can see all this blue is mostly highlighting abstract, the mode of abstract science, and a bit of abstract philosophy in there. So we're going to go and translate this number 4 paragraph in the Science of Logic using these metamodes to show the confusion, but also to get to the clarity. So the 3 modes I'm going to be teaching is, first we're going to read the paragraph and do a universal summary. So I have received some feedback in how to improve, and I think people find that going to the 2nd and 3rd levels of analysis is a little bit too pedantic to get the general bird's eye view of what Hegel's saying. So we'll read this paragraph entirely because it's short as the first level, the universal level of teaching, and then get a kind of snapshot. And then you can kind of fast forward if you want to skip this or go to a different video if you don't want to see the metamode interpretations, which other scholars will need to see in order to verify that this is incredibly profound and that it's not just right Hegelianism. It includes it. It's more right Hegelian than right Hegelians, but it's also more left Hegelian than left Hegelians. It's more artistic than artists. It's more religious than religious individuals. It's more philosophical than abstract philosophers, and it's more scientific than finite scientists. More scientific than scientists. It's genuine wisdom. So let's try that today. Every time we do these lessons, you'll see hopefully a change or an improvement, and hopefully this paragraph will be the first step of an extra layer of clarity. So let's make this more full screen so you can see it. I'll blow it up a little bit more for you, but let's get into it. Okay. If I can find it. Give me a second here. You can tell that we're trying really in a quite serious way, trying to really break through the miscommunication bubble as well. Okay. I hope you can see that. Is it clear for you? Wonderful, it is. Okay, so we're going to start with not only the universal perspective, but we're going to start with this word here, external. So we're going to read this in a way where external consciousness will interpret it in a false mode at first, because dialectics will turn you into your opposite if you don't understand how they work. So we're going to read it and give the external interpretation and maybe the bird's eye view, and then also give the internal and say what really Hegel means here. So let's go. Logic did not fare quite so badly as metaphysics. That one learns from logic how to think, or the usefulness of logic and hence its purpose, were held to consist in this, just as if one could only learn how to digest and move about by studying anatomy and physiology. This prejudice has long since vanished, and the spirit of practicality certainly did not intend for logic a better fate than what was suffered by the sister science. So from the bird's eye view, essentially what he's saying is that metaphysics in the prior paragraphs was not doing very well at all, and that he's starting to bring us into this focus on logic, which makes sense. You know, the book is titled Science of Logic, and he's comparing them, and he's saying that logic is actually, in terms of external consciousness, if you're an artist or something like this, you're not going to really like this paragraph because it's all very logical, and it looks like it's abstract logic, like a dead kind of logic. But the reason why Hegel's comparing logic to metaphysics here is because Hegel actually considers logic metaphysics itself, just not the old version of metaphysics only. He sublates that, he transcends it, he incorporates it into the true form of what metaphysics was supposed to be, which is logic. And but it's not ordinary logic, right? We're talking living logic here, which might sound foreign to you, but it's very important. So what he's just saying in this paragraph is something different has happened with logic that makes it still useful because it teaches you how to think in some way. And there was a prejudice against this misinterpretation of what logic was supposed to be. And it's somewhat similar to how metaphysics is misinterpreted as well. Like Hegel tried to talk about as an ornament in the other, a temple without a holy of holies, stuff like that. He's just saying that logic has survived up until the 1800s, where Hegel is now. He published this in 1812. So he's just saying that we're comparing metaphysics and logic for a reason, and that logic has been preserved, which is important to him. And the reason why it's important is because logic is necessity. It's a necessary way of thinking that gets us into a better way of thinking, yes, but in terms of life, it's a better way of life and spirit, a higher level of community. All these opposites should be happening in your mind and sort of like making you wonder what's going on here. But now let's get into the second level of analysis. And this is the particular. So we're going to get deeper into what he really means here. And we're going to be pretty pedantic. If you really want to get into the details, this is for you. If you don't care so much, you can skip forward to the next paragraph. I'm going to keep this potentially a little bit shorter because I want to try something new in terms of the third level teaching, which will also be free, but I'll explain that at the end. So let's read it now with the colors and highlighting the metamodes. So logic did not fare quite so badly as metaphysics. And this little r here is a throw to our Marxists, I guess, even though we're doing Hegelianism here. Hegel inspired Marx, and Marx said that Hegel was upside down. So, okay, so this is like a annotation from Lenin, I believe, who, when he was reading the Science of Logic, he made little notes. So I got this off the free version. If you want it for free, it's on the Marxist website. It's at archive.org as well. But if you read this as external consciousness, you're going to read it as probably abstract science. And I've changed the color of blue to something a little bit lighter, so hopefully you can read it. Because that was some more feedback that we got. But you're probably going to still read this metaphysics as abstract philosophy, right? Okay, is that clear? And apologies for the bugs here. I am trying to coordinate a lot so that you get a really deep understanding. There's a lot of Hegel scholarship out there. It's been going on for 250 years, but nobody's pierced through. And what I want to do for you is I want you to pierce through and be able to hold your own with these world-class Hegelians. They are very intelligent people. As much as people call each other down in the spirit of abstract negation, we don't want to do that. We want to be in sublation. We want to point out a potential limit to clarify it, to raise them higher and vindicate philosophers. Okay, so logic is interpreted as abstract science, right? We're talking about, okay, logic in university, you know, Venn diagrams and symbolic logic and, you know, all these types of predicate logic, stuff that if you're not a formal logician or a philosopher will hurt your mind, especially if you're an artist. So artists are really not feeling this right now, but hang in there, our artists. Hegel sublates you too. So let's go on. That one learns from logic how to think. So once again, thinking is usually seen in opposition to feeling, the artistic, beautiful, intuitive moment. So this is again pretty hardcore abstract science. And it could be seen as a little bit of philosophy too. And he says in parentheses, the usefulness of logic and hence its purpose were held to consist in this, and how to think, right? But here's where it gets kind of strange. He's saying, just as if one could only learn how to digest and move about by studying anatomy and physiology. Why is he mentioning these things here? And this is definitely abstract science now, right? Because physiology and anatomy are relatively modern, and they were in Hegel's time too, but in a more nascent form. Darwinian natural selection and evolution wasn't known yet. They had Lamarckianism, which was like the precursor, which is still mixed with some pretty interesting, weird things as you're trying to figure out homunculuses and like how does things evolve and interesting things. So anyway, why he's mentioning this is teaching you how to think is kind of pointless in one way because you're doing it automatically, right? Just like digestion in terms of anatomy or movement in terms of physiology, you don't need to study anatomy or physiology to digest your food or move around in the world. You can just do it naturally, right? So in some sense, there's a prejudice here. He's saying something negative about how logic is interpreted as how to think. Well, you don't need to teach somebody how to think. We do it automatically. It's common sense to think. And that's why a lot of people think logic is useless, right? And he's trying to say, well, some people think it's useful. And that's what the purpose is. But a lot of people think that, well, even this starts to sound as pointless as metaphysics. It's some kind of woo-woo thing where we just need to study the sciences and, you know, empirical phenomena, and we're going to get down to how things work. We don't need this extra layer of logic, which doesn't seem to contribute anything. So this is a prejudice to interpret logic this way. And he's saying that it has vanished. So this is kind of confusing. It might be a translation issue too. I looked at other translations. But in some sense, the prejudice that you need to learn logic to learn how to think is vanishing, and they're replacing it with a new type of abstract science, right? That's why this paragraph is very abstract science heavy. And in some sense, this is why, you know, that prejudice in one sense has disappeared, but the other prejudice that logic is kind of useless is still alive. And it's in the spirit of practicality, which is, again, he's talking about the other paragraph where he's mentioning that the educationalists now and everybody after the French Revolution is really saying, well, you don't need this logic extra layer that doesn't explain anything beyond what we can know, you know, from just studying things directly in a practical way and then doing useful things. So this is still directed at abstract scientists. And they did not intend for logic a better fate than was suffered by the sister science. So all of this is abstract science. And of course, he's using this word spirit in an intentional way because it is a bit religious. Even though he's using it in a secular sense here, it can be interpreted by external consciousness, right? We're in external consciousness. They'll interpret this as a little glimmer of why is he talking about religion here with practicality and abstract science and logic and all this. But we're going to give little asterisks here for sister science. And people might be wondering, okay, well, what is he talking about here, sister science? He's referencing abstract philosophy again. He's talking about metaphysics here, the sister science. He's bringing in gender a little bit here. And I think that's on purpose in a certain way to throw in another sort of metamode in a different way. So this is where we're at in terms of an external interpretation of the paragraph. Abstract scientists still think that logic is useless. So in one sense, they're still under that prejudice, but in another sense, they're getting rid of the prejudice, which is a bad thing, right? They're saying that learning how to think is important, but you don't do it in this abstract way. You do it in a practical way. And that's what makes logic a little bit different from metaphysics, because metaphysics seems to be wholly, like it describes in some sense a physics, but it's a physics that's a beyond, right? It's to do with this other realm. It's about the thinking about physics, the physics of physics. It's got this self-reflexivity in it. So this is how external consciousness might read this paragraph. And now let's go into how does Hegel really mean it? Now this is kind of confusing. Oh, it's jumping around. Another little glitch. My apologies. This is a confusing paragraph because ordinary consciousness, like when people first read Hegel, wow, it's really jumping around. Oops. They're going to read this and think they understand a good portion of what's happening here because it's mostly the same. Like internal consciousness, the way Hegel means this, he does mean logic has not fared quite so badly as metaphysics. He does mean this in a mostly abstractly scientific way. He's talking to the abstract scientists. And he does mean metaphysics in terms of the older metaphysics too, like Plato, Aristotle. But he also is throwing in a little bit of religion in here. Because when he says the meta is a sort of transcendental activity. And it is a system of logic. And we don't normally think about it in this way. But he's vindicating metaphysics while it looks like the paragraph is negating it. And that logic he's using in a deeper sense, which we'll get into. He's saying that one learns from logic how to think, the usefulness of logic and hence its purpose were held to consist in this. All of this is still abstract science. How to digest and move about with anatomy and physiology. This prejudice has long since vanished, and the spirit of practicality certainly did not intend for logic a better fate than was suffered by the sister science. All that is the same as external consciousness. That's why this will be one paragraph where the internal understanding and the external understanding will appear the same. But I want to make one change, and you're going to notice that individual words matter. That's why a lot of Hegelian scholars are really ordinary or very precise about every single thing. That's why in the prior session I mentioned that there's a lot of German philosophers who will say you can't understand Hegel unless you know German, because the declension, the grammar, everything is so precise in Hegel that if you miss a word, it can change everything. But we can get to this hyper precision because there's a kind of there's a logic that's moving through the words that you can grasp, even if the translations are bad. And this translation is a little bit weird, but it's good enough to get us to this change. It's a little bit more profound, and we're going to change this to white to mean genuine wisdom here in the 5th meta mode. And genuine wisdom is the highest mode. It's technically genuine philosophy. It's the real concrete mode. But we're going to say that this is going to be still in blue highlight. Oops. It's hard to talk and highlight at the same time. So we're going to keep it as he's still directing this at abstract scientists, but we're making the font white because he's really mentioning the sister science in its higher form in a certain sense. That metaphysics is being redeemed by Hegel, and he doesn't want the sister science, the metaphysics, to be ignored or truncated by this practical kind of abstract science, right? Normal science. He's trying to say, well, there's this kind of like spiritual, deeper, eternal dynamic to it that is being thrown out baby with the bathwater in terms of the French Revolution. He wants to preserve a part of this. So he's trying to say that it's good that normal logic is being preserved in this bizarre way where not even these practical abstract scientists were meaning it. It's sneaking in, and even though it looks kind of useless, it still seems to have some kind of utility, which he'll talk about in the next paragraph. But really saying they did not intend logic better fate than was suffered by the sister science. I'm going to say one last thing about this. The reason why he's calling sister science in terms of metaphysics is that metaphysics is supposed to be a science. So that's why often metaphysics and normal physics or normal science we wonder, like, what's the point, what's the difference between these? And why I say we're really emphasizing here that the metaphysics is a science. So you would think that the abstract scientists would like it, but they're not. They're rejecting it, right? So there's something about the science of the metaphysics that is different from abstract or normal science. And he's kind of hinting at this here by referring to metaphysics as still a science, even though science of that age was rejecting it. So it's like, it looks like science is rejecting science. And that's why this paragraph to external consciousness might look paradoxical. But if we make this little subtle change here at the end, then we're really getting into this hyper nuance, this hyper precision that makes all the difference in how to contextualize this paragraph, right? So even though external consciousness thinks it understands this paragraph, it's probably in a different universe of meaning. And that's why this is so much infighting in even Hegelian scholarship, never mind ordinary siloed scholarship that's not trying to be universal. So that's what I want to say. This is the internal understanding. So I will copy these to the other document, and you can read them all together: the ordinary understanding, the external understanding, the internal understanding. Right, so this is the universal mode and the particular mode taught. But there's also another level that I want to introduce, and it's the individual. It's even more refined. If you want to get into even more detail here, there's another level that I'm going to teach, but I'm going to put in a little bit of a boundary to cross over for those that are very serious, that want to and feel the call of true infinite science, that feel the call to the actual truth beyond our human biases and prejudices and subjectivities, and get down to what abstract scientists really want, which is objectivity, what is really there, happening without us. And this level requires an even deeper level. So I'm going to put a little boundary in place to have people come into this deeper level by signing up for something called Hegel's golden ticket. So it's a bit of a reference to carnivals and playgrounds. If you're not understanding this so far, you might think this is a circus, and that's okay too, because abstract negation, this like not understanding, this pushing away, this othering, this confusion, that's part of the process of learning. And it's not indoctrination. We want you to understand it at your rate. So questioning everything is important. But I'm going to pull up the golden ticket here, because that's where I'm going after this. Hegel's golden ticket says, present this ticket to Scintillating Science of Logic, which is me or the crew that will eventually continue these lessons, at either the morning session or the evening session on the first day of your first attempt at the wisdom quiz. And if you click on it, you'll see that the links are embedded. And the wisdom quiz is just 26 questions that you can attempt. You don't have to pass it. You can take 5 minutes, you can take a half an hour, whatever wisdom you want to display to this New World Spirit crew. And there'll be a back and forth, so you can challenge the criterion, right? It's a Socratic process of genuine philosophy. You can question us, we can question you, and if the standards hold, if they're more self-justifying, coherent in a real science, a real logic, then that's what holds. Please accompany this ticket with a brief recap in your own words of the vow of unabandonment. And there's a link to the vow as well, and there's 5 levels to it that you can explore. And you don't have to fully comprehend it, you just have to recap that you went over it and you understand the base premise of it. And then the third thing is to provide one suggestion to improve the spirit license. And you don't have to sign this license, you just have to know about it right now to access. These 3 things will buy you or give you access to 20 free lessons of this individual, this very detailed level, after which time you may decide to sign to the vow's lowest level, which is the 5th level, which is the easiest. Also sign the spirit license. You might want to do that as well once it makes sense and your suggestion is incorporated. And then you pass through something called the smashing room of absolute negation, which is just a social media portal where people go in and they externalize their critiques. We want skepticism to be at the base of this. We don't want anybody to come in to this movement in a way where they feel manipulated or indoctrinated or in a culty kind of way. We want to have a culture, not a negative cult. And even cults of the past were in some sense positive, but over time they become a negative thing. So we want to be a high-performance culture, a high-performance organization that is grounded in self-determining thought, critical thinking, skepticism, and that, interestingly, to get to the proof of truth, even capital T truth for our religious individuals, you actually have to be absolutely skeptical. And that's where our abstract scientists will really love this, and our ordinary philosophers will think, okay, there's something to this, where we're having opposites come together simultaneously. That's a speculative thought. Or in Buddhism, that's a non-dual thought. Or in any of the other ideologies of the last 10 to 40,000 years, this is what our indigenous ancestors were getting in touch with. This real way of life, of nature in some sense, is following a process of evolution in this wisdom. And sometimes it doesn't. So once you do these things, these 6 things, this will grant you the 3rd and highest lessons. So there's actually one more lesson after this individual. It's like hyper-individual, where we learn as a group, or whoever wants to come in, there's something incredibly profound to what Hegel is teaching. And this is where my level is at. And you can help learn along with me. I'll carry you up to what took me 4,000 hours to learn. And then other Hegelian scholars can come in and lend their expertise. And there's some scholars out there, men and women and beyond, that have been studying Hegel for 40 years or more. And they have a tremendous amount of knowledge that will galvanize and accelerate this true Hegel, this true way of studying this great master of wisdom, great pursuer of truth, is Hegel. So we want to invite in that wisdom because it's not an abstract negation, it's not a zero-sum game. Once you understand what the spirit of sublation really is, the real way of philosophy, real reputation, as we'll cover later, it's much more enjoyable, it's much more blessed, you could say. It's better science, it's clear, and it incorporates and integrates everybody's perspectives in a coherent way. We're looking for that coherence, and not just coherence, a system of super coherence, of absolutely self-grounded consistency. Sounds paradoxical, but Hegel solves that problem, and that's why you will be glorified. You can write papers as a secular scientist. You can whatever mode you can write you can make an artistic expression, a painting, an art. You can write this in all the metamodes, and it's all the same logic because it's universal. It's truly in essence, and it gets down to being. All right, thank you for joining me on this session. I hope this was informative to you. If you want one of these tickets, just email, make a comment on the chats or on the YouTube video, wherever you're finding this. I'm going to be surveying those, and then I'll respond to you with your own ticket with like a ticket number. And then once you perform the wisdom quiz attempt, study the vow of abandonment and the spirit license, make a suggestion, then I'll look over that. And then there's a private link. I'm going to be teaching it right now, where it's not fully public. It's like a private link where I'll add your email address or whatever will give you access to the link, and then you can watch it with me and have a discussion and ask more questions there. And then yes, in 4 months from now, roughly before the United States election, I'll make all these lessons free, because this is real spiritual knowledge. Like, this is knowledge that belongs to everybody, and I'm only making this level more particular because I want more committed individuals to work along with me, because now you're starting to get to my level of understanding that even though this is divine cognition, this is absolute self-certainty, which raises faith to knowing. Right? Hegel claims that in his preface to the Phenomenology of Spirit, and it's true. I've experienced it, and we can prove it for the first time. And we're starting to write papers on that. I want people in this level to have patience even with me, and then work together in that higher sublative spirit. So what the wisdom quiz, the vow of abandonment, and the spirit license do, they're all constructed around universal logic. They're transforming economics and all these very practical tools, very pragmatic, right? Real, genuine philosophy is about being and thinking. It's about doing and being in a state, having character. It allows you to grasp the sublation more in your beingness. And even though you're not fully signing on to anything, just knowing about it starts to transform your being. And just like me knowing we're both having a dialectic, we're influencing each other. So it's just a way to increase the chances that once you get to this higher level of depth, it starts to get even more, you get to the inner contradictions that can become very heated in these nuclear dialectics, these explosive ones. So I'm trying to make sure that our learning environment is more stable than ordinary learning environments as we get into the weeds more and more of why there's a meta crisis, why trust is going down, why there's a breakdown in cooperation globally, why we're in world wars, like on 3 different fronts. It's because when you really drill down to what the words mean, you get into this metacognition, this sort of metaphysics that is simultaneously a logic, which is in the mode of being, that is an epistemology and an ontology at the same time. And that structure is a system of science, genuine science, the real objective, eternal, absolute, self-grounding, infinitely justified science, which is what normal empirical science is trying to do. So yes, please join me if you're interested in that level. And in 4 months, I'll give it for free anyway, because we need to get moving quickly. We need to enter into our flow states and start this new world inner governance model that makes sense to you and everybody that comes into this movement in a critical mass miracle that is simultaneously genuinely rational mysticism that you can know, and it brings beauty and meaning back to life. This is it, the purpose of life, and this is your golden ticket. Okay. See you on the next one, or see you in the private session if you get this ticket done today. And also, this is not on any websites, but I will be teaching at night as well. And that will also be streamed for free in the universal and particular mode, and then the individual will be past the wisdom quiz and all of that. And this is really to help you get into this when scholarship in academia is really becoming hyper-credentialized, and there's paywalls, and there's a lot of problems in debt slavery. There's a lot of stuff preventing people from accessing this innate knowledge that is already within you. It just needs to be explicated. And that's what is incredible about this now. I am so privileged, and I feel honored to be sharing this with you and being the one playing this role and taking the vow of unabandonment for you already. I've already taken the vow. I've already passed my wisdom quiz, and I've already refined the smashing room for you to get out the trauma that's been embedded in you from this toxic culture that we've been in for our whole lives. And yeah, signing the spirit license to give what I can to you, to raise you into where you can shine in your highest self, whether you're an artist, a religious individual in any of the religions, whether you're an abstract philosopher of ancient days, loving ancient wisdom traditions, or you're an abstract philosopher, or sorry, an abstract scientist of modern secular understanding. All that belongs in genuine wisdom when you see it in the right way. Please join me either in the private room, and you'll see there's a link to the ticket there, and I'll add your email address and you can get on there, and then maybe I'll see you tonight as well. Okay, take care of yourselves, stay compassionate, stay loving, and as always, keep sublating. Peace.